What's going on, everyone? Desktops Gaming here. Welcome back to the channel. Today I figured we'd do something a little different today, do kind of a build guide. Now I know that's a touchy subject, especially considering the GPU and CPU market right now. I want to use this more as a basis of what you could do with budgets in a certain range. So today we'll be going over kind of a difference between an about $1,100 build up to about a $1,300 build, what you could afford to maybe sacrifice or replace, or what you might want to upgrade certain components for. So for the basis of that, like I said, I have a few parts here in front of us. So let's dive into how you could assemble an $1,100 to $1,300 build. Let's go. All right, so here in front of us, you can see we have a couple different components laid out on the table. First here, starting with the Macube 310. We did some posts on this on the Instagram a while back, but we never shot a video on it. We've done a video on the 110, the micro ATX version of this one, but we want to do the full-size ATX for a build today. Main reason, this case is really good quality and only $59.99 US dollars. So, you know, a really solid case. You do get some nice features with it, and it's not gonna, blow the bank. So, not too bad of a case to work with. The main features we like about the case so much, I've already removed the front panel here, but the front and back panel are completely toolless. So what that means is if we go to put this back on, if I can get it on the first try here, you have to kind of line up the magnets here. There we are. The front and back panel, there's no thumb screws or anything. So you just lift the little handle here that's on the railing and pull that down, and then you can lift the glass out. And it just kind of snaps back together with magnets and two little clips that hold it. And then the back panel is the same way. You have a little open hinge here. You can let that down and back just like that. Like I said, no thumb screws on either side. I thought that was really cool with what Macube did with that. Diving a little bit into what we're going to be putting in this in the first build today, then we'll get into more kind of features of the case and everything like that once we dive into actually assembling it. We're going to be using our X570 Aorus Elite here from Gigabyte as our motherboard, budgeting about 200 bucks for the motherboard. Of course, you could go with the B550 around the same price range if you don't need all the PCIe 4.0 support, which for a gaming system you don't really need unless you just want some super fast storage. It's nice to have it if you want it in all slots. With this, whether it be B550 or X570, you're always going to have at least one tied to the CPU, available for faster storage, things like that. For the CPU, we're going with our Ryzen5 3600 here. Again, kind of sticking around that same range, about a $200 processor. Again, like I said, as these kind of become more in stock, like I said, you could swap this out for a different one, or if you want to stretch a little more budget for a higher end CPU, that's fine. This is still a 6-core, 12-thread processor, so definitely plenty to work with still. Like I said, we've used the 3600 a good bit in the past. Still pretty good bang for the buck, hovering around 200 bucks right now. They did get down to about 160, 170, but they seem to have gone back up because of the CPU market right now. Just about as bad as GPUs on the Ryzen side. Like I said, just kind of keep that in mind. That's the budget we're constraining against for CPU. Now you could just use the stock cooler that's installed with this, but we figured we'd go and budget in for around the $1,300 price range today, a actual separate CPU cooler, this one being the Deepcool AS500. It's a pretty nice tower cooler with some, with a 140 fan on it. It's got a little bit of RGB, really quiet, high performing cooler. Like I said, you could get away with, if you're going with the 3600, just using the stock fan that's included in the box. Works just fine, cools just fine. It would be a little noisier than what this is because it is a smaller fan, has to spin a little faster. But like I said, with this one, if you plan to keep your system for a while and maybe upgrade your CPU within the next couple years, this wouldn't be a bad cooler to go with because it would give you more overhead for overclocking. Of course, it would still keep the temps down on this. If we're going to get into overclocking this guy as well, which we might do today, just to see how much it helps. But like I said, if you're wanting to kind of future-proof yourself, and I hate using that term, but keep a cooler around for a little bit longer that's going to outlive a couple different processors, not a bad cooler to go with. Like I said, and these are currently going for around $59.99 as well, so kind of competing up there with some of your popular, not Tua tower coolers, things of that nature, but not necessarily needed for the 3600, but keep that in mind if you say want to upgrade to a higher TDP CPU down the line. For the GPU, we're going with, we just have our RTX 2070 Super here from Gigabyte as well. Again, we're kind of budgeting this range for around $500 to $600. That's the card range you'd be looking at as soon as everyone can buy one again. Now, of course, a current 30 series would be a little better to go with, especially for the money. But like I said, we just have this kind of as a placeholder in this system that we're going to build today for right now. But like I said, keep that in mind. The price range we're shooting at is around $500 to $600 on what we would spend on a good GPU. And of course, you know, $600 and some change would grant you something like a 3070 over a 2070. And I would definitely recommend that if you can get your hands on one. But just keep that in mind. Not necessarily recommend you buy that CPU or GPU, but something in that price range. All right, and then moving on to RAM, we have some sent over here from SiliconPower, some of their X turbine RAM here. Like I said, we have a 216 gig, 3200 speed kits. Like I said, for RAM, we're looking around 85 to 150 or so, depending on if you want 16 or 32 gigs. For a gaming rig, you can get away just fine in most titles still with 16 gigs. And of course, something clocked a little higher, say 3600 megahertz, would definitely help, especially if you're going a Ryzen-based system like this. Ryzen does tend to like that faster memory. So, you know, having 16 gigs at a higher speed definitely helps. We'll be putting in a 32 gig kit today, definitely not necessary. So unless you're going to do some, you know, heavy streaming and gaming, that it can help. If you're going to be doing some video editing, photo editing, having more RAM can help. But as far as just a gaming system, 16 gigs is still just fine as a baseline for most games these days. You can get by just fine with 16, but like I said, we'll be going 32 today. And then for storage, of course, you could go with some 2.5-inch regular SATA drives, but we're going with one from XPG here. It's one of their 512 gig M.2s. So if you want something a little faster, this one reads up to 3500, writes up to 3000, so still decently fast drive. It's PCIe Gen 3. Like I said, you could go Gen 4 with the B550 or X570 motherboard, but again, go ahead and attribute some cost there if you're going to do that, if you need that faster storage, but one of these will get us by just fine. Normally I'd recommend something a little more than a 512. 512 is going to be enough for just a gaming system for most games, even though games are getting huge these days and can take over 100 gigs for one game, which is just getting crazy looking at you, Call of Duty. But like I said, you know, you could combine this with something, say like a 2.5-inch SATA. It's gonna be a little cheaper, say a 2 terabyte or 1 terabyte drive, and you know, kind of use that for your mass storage and put your main programs and OS on the faster M.2s just to get a snappier feeling system. Now, the last thing we have here is some extra fans. We actually have some Bionix P-120 ARGB fans. These are some really cool kind of connecting fans, kind of similar to the new Leon Lee fans. These are meant to kind of daisy chain together, kind of like that with some clip connectors. Again, for the Macube 310 here, it only comes pre-installed with one rear exhaust fan. Now for lower end hardware, you know, stuff that's not getting quite as warm, you could get away fine passively kind of cooling like that, just having the one exhaust. I still like to add at least one intake, preferably two, and then keeping one exhaust. So we do have 3 here with us today. Now this kit is currently going for $59.99 for a 3-pack kit like this. So if you do want to add a little bit of RGB to your system, and add, you know, some extra, better thermals, because like I said, you're going to have some extra help getting air in and out of the case more efficiently versus just having, the one exhaust that comes stock with this. You can definitely invest in some fans. Going without RGB is definitely a little cheaper than going with RGB, but figured I'd mention that since we got them sent over from Arctic. We're going to be throwing them in here today. Like I said, but all of this combined does add up to about $1,360. So like I said, you could definitely cut some corners out if you'd like to. Obviously, like I said before, maybe drop it down to 500 or so for your graphics card budget. If you're sticking with the lower end TDP, say the 3600 or even the new 5600X, you could get away running the stock cooler and be just fine. You could cut down to 16 gigs of RAM instead of 32. And like I said, cut out the cooler if you just want to run the stock one that's included. Just leaves less room for overclocking and say if you decide to upgrade your CPU down the line. All right, so that about covers kind of everything. Let's get into breaking the case down. We'll hop into some building, and then we'll come back and talk about what you could do differently as far as with a case like this, but we'll go and dive into a little bit more on the case and the components we're going to use. So let's get into building. So now that we got up a little closer, we'll go over some features of the case that we thought were pretty neat. A lot of similarities if we checked out our Macube 110. This is, like I said, just the bigger brother to the 110. This is the 310. Looking on the inside of the case here, we're going to jump into that. Like I said, we have, of course, ATX motherboard support here. Then you have, looking inside the case here, like I said, ATX motherboard support. We have grommet cutouts here along the side where you pass your 24-pin cables and everything too. Like I said, no grommets along the top or bottom, but typically you can't see those quite as well once your motherboard's installed, so no big deal there. One thing we did like pretty neat on these is their GPU card support. So you actually have a little brace here that you can move up and down to position under your card. So if you're experiencing any GPU sag once you have it installed, you can kind of flip this over, move it up into place, and that will help support your card if you're experiencing any kind of sag. So I thought that was pretty nice. Moving on to the top of the case here, we'll flip it around where you guys can see. I can see we do have some pretty good ventilation along the top here, and there are some cutouts along each side and the front, and we'll touch on that in just a sec. But going over the I/O, we do have the power and reset switch here. We do have a separate headphone and audio jack. You know, if you do ever use those, which wouldn't recommend, always plug into the back of your motherboard. And then we have two USB 3s right here as well. So going along, we'll go ahead and pop the back panel off here. And again, this one is toolless, just like the front panel is that we've already taken off. This one works very much the same way. You just have a little open tab here. You just pull that down, and then you can lift all of that off. Then set that to the side. And then going along the back here, and what the 110 has, or excuse me, what the 310 has that the 110 does not, is actually this little fan hub here. So it actually includes a little PWM fan hub, so it terminates to one 4-pin PWM connector here for your fans. And then there's actually 4 headers here. So if you do want to run your fans to this and just have one plug-in, you can do it like that. And of course we have our normal variety of front panel connectors here. We have the USB 3, HD audio, and then of course we have the power reset switch. And then let's see, we have the power LED and all that stuff around that lights up around the switch, tucked in the bottom there as well. There's that GPU support bracket I was talking about that you can move up and down, and just has a little thumb screw there that you can lock it into place with. And of course you do have two 2.5-inch drive mounts here on the back. No captive here or anything, but again, not expected at a case at this price range, but really solid to have them on the back here still. Like I said, that's trays that you can remove to install them, then pop the whole tray back on. And then we do have another 3.5-inch drive cage down here. Of course, you can still mount 2.5s on top. It has mount for that on top of them, or you can slide the whole thing out, put a 3.5-inch drive, spinning drive in there if you want to do it like that. You do have some cutouts here along the side if you guys want to run your fan cabling through here, which we will be doing here in just a bit. And then decent cable tie down points. I mean, you have kind of these included Velcro straps here that are screwed into the case to help kind of manage anything you can pass through these two here. And then there's, plenty of different grommet points and tie down points here, that you can use zip ties on to cinch down anything you need to as you're doing cable management along the way. And then of course you have your power supply basement. It's got a filter here on the bottom. Like I said, can fit a decent sized power supply, looks like. We'll be using a Seasonic unit, 650 watt unit here today, and that is included in that $1,300 price. You could go a little beefier if you expect to upgrade to, or eventually want to upgrade to a higher end 30 series card or higher end 6000 series Radeon card. But like 650 should be plenty for what we're doing today and give the CPU and card plenty of power. So it should be doing just fine with that. But like I said, it looks like as far as on the bottom here, you can remove the hard drive cage if you need to make more room for that power supply, or say if you have longer cables, you can remove it completely. Like I said, it can't really be slid all too much. Like I said, you can scoot it back, but it's currently in its most forward position. So if you do need just the extra space, you're not going to use the 3.5-inch drive mounts here, you can unscrew it from the bottom and just pull the whole thing out if need be. Like I said, they take a little bit of modification, but it can come out. All right, so moving around to the top here, like I said, the top and front panel just kind of pop off like so. So we'll go ahead and pop these up and out of the way. Now, of course, you do have room up top and in the front to mount different radiators. Like I said, so you have support here for what looks like you could maybe get away with fitting 3 120s, a 240 or 280, because there's rails for both here, would be a little easier to squeeze along. Then of course you'd have to take into account how much room you'd have into your motherboard tray actually started. And of course it has enough room for a 360 up front. So if we go and pop that panel off real quick. There we are. You do have the mounting room and rails up front here. So you could put a 360 up front because it has a cutout here in the basement to slide that down and through. Today we're going to mount, we'll do 2 intakes here towards the top and then we'll put our other RGB fan here in the back for exhaust, just to give it a little more flair and help bring some cool air in. Now, looking along this case, this is the front panel. It doesn't look like you would get a ton of airflow through here, but actually you do surprisingly get some decent ones through this mesh. Now, of course, you know, versus a full mesh front panel case, you're not gonna get quite as much compared to this, but it still does pretty well. So we're gonna pop this back on and I'll show you kind of the gap space in between where the fans would be installed versus how much room you would have. I'm gonna pop all this back in and we'll see if we can get a good shot where you guys can see here. But there we go. All of this does have decent ventilation that I can see through on the other side. And of course, like I said, versus a full mesh front panel, you know, you would do a little better versus a solid panel like this. But I think, again, for the price range, and so long as you're not running super hot hardware, you should be fine. It is a little more meshed at the top. So you could say, you know, we're gonna be exhausting, using this as exhaust today, but you could definitely use this as intake, since you do have a little bit of filtration here at the top as well. It kind of matches the mesh in the front. So if you want to flip the configuration and do an intake from the top, that's definitely possible. All right, so we're gonna pop this on. Snap that back in place, and it snaps around the I/O, which is nice. You don't have to worry about pulling on any I/O cables or anything like that along the top, since this is separate from those. Those will stay mounted in place. All right, so like I said, we're gonna go ahead and set this to the side. Put some paste down right after we screw these into place. Everything mounted there. Now we can go and install the storage. Like I said, this is where you could scale back a little bit of budget as well. Like I said previously, like I said, you don't have to so much use an M.2. A 2.5-inch SATA drive would be just fine for storage, while this would get you a little more speed though. So we're gonna go install this as our main drive. And of course, like I said, you could have this as your main, or like I said, run this as a, run another boot drive or run another storage drive later on if you want to upgrade storage and add more than what this M.2 can do. Normally we'd install it on the top slot, especially if it's B550 and this was PCIe Gen 4, but since it's Gen 3, like I said, all the slots here will run Gen 3, and this has a little bit of RGB effect to it, so we're going to put it off where it can be seen, not under the cover there. That about does it for what we can put on the motherboard currently. We'll go ahead and scoot this over to the side. And we'll start getting it into the case. So now that we've finished the build, got all the boring kill management stuff out of the way, wasn't gonna bore you guys with that. Well, it's time to see if our hard work paid off here. Let's go ahead and cut it on. Power switch is on. Go and power it up. All right, looks like we got our cooler lighting up there. And of course, I'll grab you guys in a bit for some close-ups. Like I said, we'll see if everything lights up here in just a sec. I believe it's got to boot fully to get the fans lighting up here. They're spinning, but since they're plugged into the ARGB connector, it has to boot and then connect to the RGB software. So we'll give that just a sec. And there we are. Like I said, the RGB has come on. You can see all the fans lighting up now. We put two here in the front as intake, one in the back's exhaust. Like I said, the Macube normally does come with that one rear exhaust fan, but it's just a regular fan, no RGB or anything on there. So I'm gonna come grab you guys real quick. Let's do some close-ups. So we're up close and personal here. We can start taking a look at what the RAM looks like. Like I said, this is the X Power from SiliconPower here. Some of their ARGB models. Like I said, this is the 32 gig kit, but like I said, you could easily scale this back down to the 16 gig kit like we talked about in the beginning there. Like I said, using the Deepcool AS500, like I said, in the Macube 110 case, or excuse me, Macube 310 case. Like I said, we have the fans installed, like I said, along the front here as intake. So looking pretty good. Like I said, the rings are on the front of these fans, like I said, not on the blades themselves, just on that outer ring there, outer edge. I'm not sure how much the camera can pick this up, but they're looking pretty even. I can't really tell a whole lot of individual lighting or anything. It actually blends together all pretty well with the cover they have over it. But yeah, like I said, looking pretty good. I think this would be a perfect build for just about anyone. Like I said, we have our Aorus card down bottom there. But like I said, mainly wanted to go into this as more of a, not necessarily focusing on the build itself, although it did come out looking pretty good, and it looks even pretty good with everything turned off, no RGB going on, just all the blacked out parts since it's a black back case. But mainly wanted to do this as a more of a guideline of what kind of budget constraints you can get and how good a build you can get without spending a ton of cash. Now, obviously, budget is kind of subjective on who you ask, and like I said, everyone's going to have a different budget. But I think for $1,100 to $1,300, this comes out being pretty solid. Like I said, you would have to worry about, with the GPU market right now, finding a card. But like I said, once it does stabilize, once you can find cards, you would look for something in the $500 to $600 range. Like I said, for the cooler here, with the CPU we're using, or even a newer, say 5600X, they do come with the stock cooler. The stock cooler will work fine. Like I said, this will just give us some more overclocking headroom, especially on something, say if we put a 5600X in here instead, it would give us a little bit more headroom, and then we'd be able to push the clocks a little bit higher versus what the stock cooler can do, and it would be a lot quieter too, because it's the single 140 on the front of this fan here, or on the front of this cooler here. It's a single 140 fan, so like I said, it doesn't have to spin up and get super loud to give you a good amount of cooling. That about wraps it up on the overview of the build on a budget we wanted to do today, and just kind of showing you across different price ranges what you could achieve. I think this is a great looking case. As far as thermals go, we did do some testing once we got everything built together. We took a little bit since I last talked to you guys. We did the close-up. Thermals wise, with the cooler we have installed here, running some Cinebench test here, we were seeing an average of around 68 C or so with this cooler installed. And like I said, it never really got super loud or anything. We could go in, tweak the fan curves up a little bit, make it more audible, and then get even better performance that way. But like I said, couldn't really even hear the fan spinning inside the case, once we had the front panel on and everything. And as far as the graphics card goes, it could need a little more room to breathe with the case like this. Like I said, the side ventilation does work better than I thought it would with the case like this, and that's what surprised me with the 110 as well. So I think as long as you're not putting in super hot hardware in here or overclocking like crazy, this would be fine, because with the card running a firmware test, which again, not the most realistic day-to-day what you would see, say, in a game, because not many games are going to push your GPU up to 100% utilization. Something like FurMark takes it up to 100% because it is a power virus workload, meaning it will use 100% of the card as much as it can while it's testing. We did a 2560 by 1440 test. I let that run for about 10 minutes with the panels on the case. We were seeing an average about 76 C, which is still fine for this card, but like I said, the temps did creep up a little bit, whereas something with a little bit better airflow feeding the card would keep that a little lower. But like I said, this card does have a decent cooler on it, so that did help manage the temps just fine, leaving a little bit of headroom there. I would like to see it a little bit lower, but considering the case of this form factor and with the solid front panel here, just the intakes on the side, I was still impressed by what it could do, considering it doesn't have a mesh front panel. Like I said, I do like the look of this all together. If you do care about aesthetics, I like that it's just a flat, flat black. So if you had this sitting on your desk, it's gonna look great. Again, as far as the case goes, love the tool entry. I like the fact that you can just clip on the front panel, clip on the back panel just by pulling the open tab on the back, and everything just holds on via magnets. That's really cool. But yeah, I think that about wraps it up, guys. I don't ramble on, take up any more of your time. But yeah, like I said, I'll link all the parts we used in this, or say something similar, in the description, kind of giving a base range of, like I said, what we talked about in the intro of what you could expect out of a build like this, performance-wise. If you guys do want to see more testing on this, let me know. I'm sure you guys have seen the 3600 and 2070 Super before, but if you want something in this price range, that's about what you'd get out of what you'd be willing to spend on components. And like I said, once GPU and CPU market kind of stabilizes a bit, you could definitely get more performance for your money upgrading this 2070 Super to, say, maybe a 3070 or a Radeon card, or a 6800 or so. You could get ample performance out of those for about the same amount of money and get a little better performance than what this 2070 Super could do. And the same thing goes with the CPU. We use the 3600 today. Still a great CPU for its price. I would like to see them slip back down if they're going to be more in stock to about 160, 170 again. They're back up to their MSRP at launch, which is not good to see after, you know, the CPU has been out for so long. But if you can't find a 5600X, which is going to run you about $100 more than what these are, the 3600 is still great for what it can do, so still not too mad at that. But yeah, like I said, I'll leave all those links in the description below if you guys do want to check more out of what we do. Like I said, we'll have more pics of this build over at Instagram on Desktops Gaming, same moniker as this channel here. Just go follow us on Instagram. Built a decent following over there. Like I said, still trying to build it over here. I like doing this longer form content for you guys. It's really fun to do. But yeah, like I said, go check out more pictures of this guy over on Instagram at Desktops Gaming. But I appreciate you guys stopping by today for this video, so take it easy.